Hello, history buffs, time travelers, and scholars. During World War I, as battles raged across Europe, an isolated corner of Japan harbored one of the most chilling and horrifying secrets of the era, a small island where survival turned to savagery. Known as Japan's Cannibal Island, this remote patch of land became infamous for its brutal conditions, where soldiers and prisoners alike faced unimaginable horrors. Stranded with dwindling supplies and cut off from hope, some inhabitants resorted to extreme measures that would haunt Japan's history forever. This is the story of how desperation, isolation, and survival instincts transformed an otherwise unassuming island into one of the darkest chapters of wartime survival, the forgotten hardships of Japanese soldiers in the Pacific. As the sun dipped over the vast Pacific Ocean, casting shadows across battle-scarred islands, Japanese soldiers huddled in damp caves and crude shelters, their faces showing the clear marks of long-lasting hunger. It was 1944, and World War II had turned against Japan. What began as an ambitious campaign for control over the Pacific had become a fight for survival, not only against Allied forces, but also against the brutal grip of starvation. On islands like Peleliu, where fierce battles took place from September to November 1944, Japanese soldiers tried to ease their hunger by chewing on coral, wearing down their teeth in search of any relief. With American submarines cutting off supply lines, food shipments slowed to a trickle. By early 1944, conditions became desperate. On Banville Island, Japanese troops resorted to eating roots, grass, and even tree bark to keep from starving. In March 1944, a group of soldiers on Banville found a field of wild taro plants, sparking brief hope, only to discover that eating the plants improperly caused poisoning and death. Survivors like Lieutenant Yoshihiko Yamamoto later remembered envying the dead, as those who remained suffered from intense hunger each day. Across the Pacific, soldiers' bodies grew weaker as supply lines collapsed under Allied attacks. In places like Guadalcanal, an estimated 10,000 Japanese troops died from starvation and related diseases during one of the war's toughest battles. Despite the jungle's abundant plant life, many soldiers lacked the knowledge to forage safely. In one instance, in October 1942, soldiers ate unfamiliar berries and became severely ill, with some dying. Desperation drove soldiers to boil leather belts or shoes for any possible nutrition, even leading them to eat sawdust mixed with sugar. Despite their suffering, the Japanese high command could do little due to limited resources. Many garrisons were left to their fate, and Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai reportedly admitted they were sending soldiers to die of hunger rather than in battle. On islands like Chichijima, soldiers were completely cut off, surviving on minimal rations and local plants. Conditions were so dire that even the disciplined Japanese military culture began to break down. By 1945, instances of desertion and even suicide became more common. The harsh toll of starvation affected both body and mind, with some soldiers experiencing hallucinations and deep despair. As the war drew to an end in 1945, many Japanese soldiers remained isolated, unaware that their country had surrendered. Lieutenant Hiru Onoda, who hid in the jungle of the Philippines with 3 others, survived on bananas and coconuts, only surrendering nearly 30 years later, in 1974. After his return, he remarked that he had learned to live with constant hunger, finding it harder to adapt to life with abundance. Horrors on Chichijima, the cannibal scandal of World War II. In 1944, as World War II raged on, the small volcanic island of Chichijima in the Pacific Ocean became the stage for one of the most horrific episodes of the war. Part of Japan's Ogasawara archipelago, Chichijima served as a crucial communications hub. The island's strategic location and radio facilities made it a prime target for Allied forces as they advanced across the Pacific. With supply lines cut off by relentless Allied attacks, the Japanese garrison stationed on the island faced a harsh reality. Food was running out. As the tide of war turned against Japan, life on Chichijima grew desperate. Soldiers, once supplied with ample rations, found themselves surviving on only a few spoonfuls of rice a day. In their struggle for sustenance, they scavenged every inch of the island, even resorting to stripping bark from trees and digging up roots. By mid-1944, these dire conditions began pushing the troops to a mental and moral breaking point. In August 1944, an American B-24 bomber was shot down near the island. Of the 9-man crew, 8 parachuted to safety, only to be captured by Japanese soldiers. It was then that the horrors on Chichijima began. Under the command of Major General Yoshio Tachibana, The Japanese officers ordered the execution of the prisoners. But this was no ordinary wartime killing. Officers went further, engaging in acts of cannibalism. In some instances, parts of the deceased airmen were removed and eaten in macabre ceremonies, where senior officers, in the midst of a morale crisis, sought to fuel themselves in any way possible. Witness testimonies from the Japanese troops, years later, described these chilling events. Officers would describe the taste of human flesh as similar to beef liver, a detail that highlighted just how shockingly desensitized some had become to the horrors around them. General Tachibana and his officers justified these acts as measures to boost morale in the face of starvation, and they even enforced them with disturbing ritualistic precision, creating a surreal and gruesome atmosphere on the island. Perhaps one of the most haunting parts of the Chichijima story involves George H.W. Bush, a young American pilot at the time, who narrowly escaped capture. On a bombing run over Chichijima, his plane was hit, but he managed to parachute into the ocean, where he was later rescued by an American submarine. Bush would go on to become the 41st President of the United States, but he would forever carry the memories of his fallen comrades who met a horrifying fate on that island. After Japan's surrender in 1945, the true extent of the atrocities on Chichijima came to light during post-war trials. Japanese soldiers who survived the war began speaking up, and the remains of American airmen were exhumed, bearing evidence of the unspeakable crimes committed against them. Testimonies from officers like Lieutenant George Onishi helped piece together the grim story, revealing a descent into barbarity brought on by the extreme pressures of war. General Yoshio Tachibana's reign of terror on Chichijima. During World War II, few narratives capture the depths of wartime depravity like the events on Chichijima, a small island where General Yoshio Tachibana commanded a garrison of Japanese troops. This island, located in Japan's Ogasawara archipelago, became infamous for a series of atrocities that shocked the world and exposed the extremities of war-driven desperation. Tachibana, a once respected military leader, oversaw an appalling transformation on Chichijima as food scarcity and relentless American air raids unraveled the soldiers' sanity and moral bearings. The legacy of his command remains one of the most disturbing accounts of the Pacific War, a horrific reminder of the depths humanity can reach under extreme pressure. Tachibana was born in 1890 in Japan's mountainous Nagano Prefecture, a region known for its hard winters and resilient culture. Rising through the ranks with distinction, he earned the Order of the Golden Kite for bravery in the Russo-Japanese War, a prestigious honor recognizing his early military successes. By 1944, however, the tide of World War II had turned against Japan, and Tachibana found himself commanding approximately 25,000 men on the remote, embattled island of Chichijima. With Allied forces blocking supply lines, Tachibana and his soldiers faced severe shortages that pushed them into desperate survival tactics. The daily reality on Chichijima was grim. As rations dwindled to less than 400 calories per day, soldiers began foraging for insects, tree bark, and boiled grass to stave off hunger. In this desperate environment, Tachibana sanctioned an unthinkable act: cannibalism. This macabre measure began after American airmen were captured on the island. Major Sueo Matoba, one of Tachibana's subordinates, later testified that he believed the cannibalism was authorized by his superiors as a last resort. In this twisted wartime logic, the practice morphed into a grim morale boost, a distorted means of survival that left a stain on Japan's military history. The brutality intensified in September 1944, when the captured American airmen, including Floyd Hall, Warren Earl Vaughn, and Jimmy Dye, met tragic fates. They were executed and cannibalized, with Tachibana presiding over these atrocities. Lieutenant Junior Grade William L. Connell, another American airman, was held for weeks, interrogated, and then subjected to the same brutal end. Even as these horrors unfolded, Tachibana maintained a facade of military order. Morning drills, reports, and defensive strategies continued as if nothing was amiss. This chilling juxtaposition of military discipline with barbaric ritual cannibalism illustrates the extent of moral decay that took hold on Chichijima. Tachibana's former staff officer, Captain Yoshitada Shioda, later described the surreal atmosphere on the island. We would discuss defense strategies in the morning and attend cannibal feasts in the evening. It was as if we were living in two different worlds. Discipline began to break down as soldiers became increasingly disturbed by the events. Some Japanese troops were horrified enough to secretly bury remains of American prisoners to prevent further desecration, risking severe punishment. Private Fumio Kido recalled one such act of silent rebellion, saying, "I couldn't bear to see another human being treated like an animal. Even in war, there must be limits. In a tragic spiral of violence and hunger, even Japanese soldiers became victims. Private Yoshio Kono later recounted that some soldiers disappeared mysteriously, only to be found in the communal cooking pots. "We were like walking skeletons," Kono recalled. Some men went mad with hunger. With fear gripping the garrison, Tachibana's authority was maintained only through a dark combination of fear and the shared guilt of those who had participated. Following Japan's surrender, the truth about Chichijima's horrors surfaced, leading to trials where Tachibana and others were held accountable. Testimonies from survivors painted a haunting picture. A commander once revered for his discipline who descended into unthinkable cruelty. Lieutenant George Onishi described the atmosphere as a descent into hell, led by a man we once thought incapable of such acts. The chilling stories of Chichijima. In the depths of the Pacific during World War II, one island haunted the memories of American soldiers and airmen like no other: Chichijima. This remote island in the Ogasawara archipelago became infamous for unthinkable acts of cruelty and survival. Allied pilots shot down in this area faced a fate darker than death, captured by the Japanese forces stationed there, who resorted to cannibalism under horrific conditions. The nightmare began in earnest on June 30th, 1944, when Lieutenant William Elder's fighter was shot down over Chichijima. He was captured, and his experiences, recounted through tears years later, revealed chilling details of his captivity. Elder described how he was taken before Japanese officers who openly discussed him as if he were meat. He recalled hearing the term kusanagi, a euphemism for cannibalism, meaning grass cutter, a word steeped in dark historical meaning tied to the samurai legends of Japan. Another captured airman, Raymond Hap Howeren, shared his own terror-filled account of being treated as though he were a potential meal. He described how guards would appraise the prisoners, even touching their arms and legs as if they were livestock. "You fat," one guard had told him. "You taste good." The prisoners began keeping watch over each other through whispered signals, fearing they could be taken at any moment. Among the many horrifying events that unfolded on the island was the fate of Lonesome Lady, a U.S. bomber that crashed on Chichijima. 8 of the 9 crew members survived the crash, only to face unspeakable horrors on land. Navy radio man Mar Moran was killed in front of his fellow crew members, who were forced to watch as he was prepared for consumption by Japanese officers. Witness James D. Clark described the gruesome scene, recounting how officers, drunk on sake, treated Moran's death like a celebration. The terrors of Chichijima weren't confined to immediate death or consumption. Many prisoners, like Sergeant Jimmy Dye, held on to life as long as they could, passing messages to their fellow captives. In one of his final moments, Dye told his cellmate to inform his family of his love and to make sure the world knew of the horrors that took place on this island. Thanks for diving into the untold horrors of Chichijima with us. If you found this story as haunting as we did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's darkest secrets. Until next time, stay curious.